Mysteries await just a page away. Ready to dive in? Welcome to The Book Reader, where stories unfold one enchanting page at a time. Subscribe now and unlock the magic.
Of The Girl Who Played with Fire by Stieg Larsson.
Part 3. Absurd Equations. March 23rd to April 3rd. Those pointless equations, to which no solution exists, are called absurdities. A plus B, A minus B, equals A2 minus B2 plus 1. Chapter 11. Wednesday, March 23rd, Maundy, Thursday, March 24th. Blomkvist took his red pen and in the margin of Svensson's manuscript drew a question mark with a circle around it and wrote, footnote. He wanted a source reference inserted. It was Wednesday, the evening before Maundy Thursday, and Millennium was more or less closed down for Easter week. Nielsen was out of the country. Kareem had gone to the mountains with her husband. Cortez had come in to deal with telephone messages for a few hours, but Blomkvist sent him home since nobody was calling. Cortez left smiling happily, on his way to see a new girlfriend. Svensson had not been around. Blomkvist sat in the office alone, plodding through his manuscript. The book was going to be 12 chapters and 288 pages long. Svensson had delivered the final text of 9 of the 12 chapters, and Blomkvist had been over every word and given the hard copy back with requests for clarification and suggestions for reworking. Svensson was a talented writer, and Blomkvist confined his editing for the most part to marginal notes. During the weeks when the manuscript had been growing on his desk, they had disagreed about only one paragraph, which Blomkvist wanted to delete and Svensson fought tooth and nail to keep. It stayed in. In short, Millennium had an excellent book that would very soon be off to the printer. There was no doubt that it would make dramatic headlines. Svensson was merciless in his exposure of the Johns, and he told the story in such a way that nobody could fail to understand that there was something wrong with the system itself. It was journalistic work of the type that should be on the endangered species list. Blomkvist had learned that Svensson was an exacting journalist who left very few loose ends. He did not employ the heavy-handed rhetoric typical of so much other social reporting, which turned texts into pretentious trash. His book was more than an exposé, it was a declaration of war. Blomkvist smiled to himself. Svensson was about 15 years younger, but he recognized the passion that he himself had once had when he took up the lance against second-rate financial reporters and put together a scandalous book. Certain newsrooms had not forgiven him. The problem with Svensson's book was that it had to be watertight. A reporter who sticks out his neck like that has to either stand behind his story 100% or refrain from publishing it. Right now Svensson was at 98%. There were still a few weak points that needed more work and one or two assertions that he had not adequately documented. At 5:30 p.m., Blomkvist opened his desk drawer and took out a cigarette. Berger had decreed a total ban in the office, but he was alone and nobody else was going to be there that weekend. He worked for another 40 minutes before he gathered up the pages and put the chapter on Berger's desk. Svensson had promised to email the final text of the remaining 3 chapters the following morning, which would give Blomkvist a chance to go through them over the weekend. A summit meeting was planned for the Tuesday after Easter when they would all sign off on the final version of the book and the Millennium articles. After that only the layout remained, which was Mom's headache alone, and then it would go to the printer. Blomkvist had not sought bids from different printers. He would entrust the job to Halvigs Reklam in Morgongava. They had printed his book about the Wennerström affair and had given him a damn good price and first-rate service. Blomkvist looked at the clock and decided to reward himself with another cigarette. He sat at the window and stared down on Godgatan. He ran his tongue over the cut on the inside of his lip. It was beginning to heal. He wondered for the 1000th time what really had happened outside Salander's building early on Sunday morning. All he knew for certain was that Salander was alive and back in Stockholm. He had tried to reach her every day since then. He had sent emails to the address she had used more than a year ago. He had walked up and down Lundagatan. He was beginning to despair. The nameplate on the door now read Salander Wu. There were 230 people with the surname Wu on the electoral roll, of whom about 140 lived in and around Stockholm, none of them on Lundagaten. Blomkvist had no idea whether she had a boyfriend or had rented out the apartment. No one came to the door when he knocked. Finally, he went back to his desk and wrote her a good old-fashioned letter. Hello, Sally. I don't know what happened a year ago, but by now even a numbskull like me has worked out that you've cut off all contact. It's for you to decide who you hang around with, and I don't mean to nag. I just want to tell you that I still think of you as my friend, that I miss your company and would love to have a cup of coffee with you, if you felt like it. I don't know what kind of a mess you've got yourself into, but the ruckus on Lundagaten was alarming. If you need help you can call me anytime. As you know, I am deeply in your debt. Plus, I have your shoulder bag. When you want it back, just let me know. If you don't want to see me, just give me an address to mail it to. I promise not to bother you, since you've indicated clearly enough that you don't want anything to do with me. Mikael. As anticipated, he never heard a word from her. When he had got home the morning after the attack on Lundagaten, he opened the shoulder bag and spread the contents on the kitchen table. There was a wallet with an ID card, about 600 kroner, $200 American, and a monthly travel card. There was a pack of Marlboro lights, 3 Bic lighters, a box of throat lozenges, a packet of tissues, a toothbrush, toothpaste, 3 tampons in a side pocket, an unopened pack of condoms with a price sticker that showed they were bought at Gatwick Airport in London, a bound notebook with stiff black A4 dividers, 5 ballpoint pens, a can of mace, a small bag with makeup, an FM radio with an earphone but no batteries, and Saturday's Aftonbladet. The most intriguing item was a hammer, easily accessible in an outside pocket. However, the attack had come so suddenly that she had not been able to make use of it or the mace. She had evidently used her keys as brass knuckles. There were still traces of blood and skin on them. Of the 6 keys on the ring, 3 of them were typical apartment keys: front door, apartment door, and the key to a padlock. But none of them fit the door of the building on Lundagaten. Blomkvist opened the notebook and went through it page by page. He recognized Salander's neat hand and could see at once that this was not a girl's secret diary. 3/4 of the pages were filled with what looked like mathematical notations. At the top of the first page was an equation that even Blomkvist recognized. x3 plus y3 equals z3. Blomkvist had never had trouble doing calculations. He had left secondary school with the highest marks in math, which in no way meant, of course, that he was a mathematician, only that he had been able to absorb the content of the school's curriculum. But Salander's pages contained formulas of a type that Blomkvist neither understood nor could even begin to understand. One equation stretched across an entire double page and ended with things crossed out and change. He could not even tell whether they were real mathematical formulas and calculations, but since he knew Salander's peculiarities, he assumed that the equations were genuine and no doubt had some esoteric meaning. He leafed back and forth for a long time. He might as well have come upon a notebook full of Chinese characters. But he grasped the essentials of what she was trying to do. She had become fascinated by Fermat's last theorem, a classic riddle. He let out a deep sigh. The last page in the book contained some very brief and cryptic notes which had absolutely nothing to do with math, but nevertheless still looked like a formula. Blonde Hulk plus Maggie equals Neb. They were underlined, encircled, and meant nothing to him. At the bottom of the page was a telephone number and the name of a car rental company in Eskilstuna, Auto Expert. Blomkvist made no attempt to interpret the notes. He stubbed out his cigarette and put on his jacket, set the alarm in the office, and walked to the terminal at Slussen, where he took the bus out to the Yuppie Reserve in Stacket, near Lannersta Sound. He had been invited to dinner with his sister, Annika Blomkvist Janini, who was turning 42. Berger began her long Easter weekend with a furious and anxiety-filled 2-mile jog that ended at the steamboat wharf in Saltsjöbaden. She had been lazy about her hours at the gym and felt stiff and out of shape. She walked home. Her husband was giving a lecture at the Modern Museum and it would be at least 8 o'clock before he got home. Berger thought she would open a bottle of good wine, switch on the sauna, and seduce him. At least it would stop her thinking about the problem that was worrying her. A week earlier she had had lunch with the CEO of the biggest media company in Sweden. Over salad he had set forth in all seriousness his intention to recruit her as editor-in-chief of the company's largest daily newspaper, the Svenska Morgonposten. The board has discussed several possibilities, but we are agreed that you would be a great asset to the paper. You're the one we want. Attached to the offer was a salary that made her income at Millennium look ridiculous. The offer had come like a bolt of lightning out of a clear blue sky, and it left her speechless. Why me? He had been oddly vague, but gradually the explanation emerged that she was known, respected, and a certifiably talented editor. They were impressed by the way she had dragged Millennium out of the quicksand it had been in 2 years earlier. The Svenska Morgonposten needed to be revitalized in the same way. There was an old man atmosphere about the newspaper that was causing a steady decline in the new subscriber rate. Berger was a powerful journalist. She had clout. Putting a woman, a feminist no less, in charge of one of Sweden's most conservative and male-dominated institutions was a provocative and bold idea. Everyone was agreed. Well, almost everyone. The ones who counted were all on his side. But I don't share the basic political views of the newspaper. Who cares? You're not an outspoken opponent either. You're going to be the boss, not an apparatchik, and the editorial page will take care of itself. He hadn't said it in so many words, but it was also a matter of class. Berger came from the right background. She had told him that she was certainly attracted by the proposal but that she could not give him an answer immediately. She was going to have to think the matter through. But they agreed that she would give them her decision sooner rather than later. The CEO had explained that if the salary offer was the reason for her hesitation, she was probably in a position to negotiate an even higher figure. A strikingly generous golden parachute would also be included. It's time for you to start thinking about your pension plan. Her 45th birthday was coming up. She had done her apprenticeship as a trainee and a temp. She had put together Millennium and become its editor-in-chief on her own merits. The moment when she would have to pick up the telephone and say yes or no was fast approaching, and she did not know what she was going to do. During the past week she had considered time and again discussing the matter with Blomkvist, but she had not been able to summon up the nerve. Instead she had been hiding the offer from him, which gave her a pang of guilt. There were some obvious disadvantages. A yes would mean breaking up the partnership with Blomkvist. He would never follow her to the Svenska Morgonposten, no matter how sweet a deal she or they could offer him. He did not need the money now, and he was getting on fine writing articles at his own pace. Berger liked being editor-in-chief of Millennium. It had given her a status within the world of journalism that she considered almost undeserved. She had never been the producer of the news. That was not her thing. She regarded herself as a mediocre writer. On the other hand, she was first-rate on radio or TV, and above all she was a brilliant editor. Besides, she enjoyed the hands-on work of editing, which was a prerequisite for the post of editor-in-chief at Millennium. Nevertheless, she was tempted. Not so much by the salary as by the fact that the job meant that she would become without question one of Sweden's big-time media players. This is a once-in-a-lifetime offer, the CEO had said. Somewhere near the Grand Hotel in Saltsjöbaden she realized to her dismay that she was not going to be able to turn the offer down. And she shuddered at the thought of having to tell Blomkvist. Dinner at the Gianninis was, as always, mildly chaotic. Annika had 2 children. Monica, 13, and Jenny, 10. Her husband, Enrico, who was the head of the Scandinavian arm of an international biotech firm, had custody of Antonio, his 16-year-old son from his first marriage. Also at dinner were Enrico's mother Antonia, his brother Pietro, his sister-in-law Eva Lotta, and their children Peter and Nicola. Plus Enrico's sister Marcella and her 4 kids, who lived in the same neighborhood. Enrico's aunt Angelina, who was regarded by the family as stark raving mad, or on good days just extremely eccentric, had also been invited, along with her new boyfriend. At the dining room table, abundant with food, the conversation went on in a rattling mixture of Swedish and Italian, sometimes simultaneously. The situation was made more annoying because Angelina spent the evening wondering out loud, to anyone who would listen, why Annika's brother was still a bachelor. She also proposed a number of suitable solutions to his problem from among the daughters of her friends. Exasperated, Blomkvist finally explained that he would be happy to get married but that unfortunately his lover was already married. That shut up even Angelina for a while. At 7:30 Blomkvist's mobile beeped. He'd thought he had shut it off and he almost missed the call as he dug it out of the inside pocket of his jacket, which someone had hung on the coat rack in the hall. It was Svensson. Am I interrupting something? Not particularly. I'm at dinner with my sister and a platoon of people from her husband's family. What's up? Two things. I've tried to get hold of Krister, but he's not answering. He's at the theater with his boyfriend. Damn. I'd promised to meet him at the office tomorrow morning with the photographs and graphics for the book. Krister was going to look at them over the weekend. But Mia has suddenly decided to drive up to see her parents in Dalarna for Easter to show them her thesis. We'll have to leave early in the morning and some of the pictures I can't email. Could I messenger them over to you tonight? You could, but look, I'm out in Lannersta. I'll be here for a while, but I'm coming back into town later. Enskede wouldn't be that far out of my way. I could drop by and pick them up. Would around 11 o'clock be okay? That's fine. The second thing, I don't think you're going to like this. Shoot. I stumbled across something I think I had better check out before the book goes to the printer. Okay, what is it? Zala, spelled with a Z. Ah, Zala the gangster. The one people seem to be terrified of and nobody wants to talk about. That's him. A couple of days ago I came across him again. I believe he's in Sweden now and that he ought to be in the list of Johns in Chapter 7. Dag. You can't start digging up new material 3 weeks before we go to press. I know. But this is a bit special. I talked to a policeman who had heard some talk about Zala. Anyway, I think it would make sense to spend a couple of days next week checking up on him. Why him? You've got plenty of other assholes in the book. This one seems to be an Olympian asshole. Nobody really knows who he is. I've got a gut feeling that it would be worth our while to poke around one more time. Don't ever discount your gut feelings, Blomkvist said. But honestly, we can't push back the deadline. The printer is booked, and the book has to come out simultaneously with the Millennium issue. I know, Svensson said, sounding dejected. I'll call you later, Blomkvist said. Johansson had just brewed a pot of coffee and poured it into the table thermos when the doorbell rang. It was just before 9 o'clock p.m. Svensson was closer to the door and, thinking it was Blomkvist coming earlier than he had said he would, he opened it without first looking through the peephole. Not Blomkvist. Instead he was confronted by a short, doll-like girl in her late teens. I'm looking for Dag Svensson and Mia Johansson, the girl said. I'm Dag Svensson. I'd like to speak with both of you. Svensson automatically looked at the clock. Johansson was curious and came into the hall to stand behind her boyfriend. It's a bit late for a visit, Svensson said. I'd like to talk about the book you're planning on publishing at Millennium. Svensson and Johansson looked at each other. And who are you? I'm interested in the subject. May I come in, or shall we discuss it here on the landing? Svensson hesitated for a second. The girl was a total stranger, and the time of her visit was odd, but she seemed harmless enough, so he held the door open. He showed her to the table in the living room. Would you like some coffee? Johansson said. How about first telling us who you are? Svensson said. Yes, please. To the coffee, I mean. My name is Lisbeth Salander. Johansson shrugged and opened the table thermos. She had already set out cups in anticipation of Blomkvist's visit. And what makes you think I'm publishing a book at Millennium? Svensson said. He was suddenly deeply suspicious, but the girl ignored him and turned instead to Johansson. She made a face that could have been a crooked smile. "Interesting thesis," she said. Johansson looked shocked. "How could you know anything about my thesis?" "I happened to get hold of a copy," the girl said cryptically. Svensson's annoyance grew. "Now you're really going to have to explain who you are and what you want." The girl's eyes met his. He suddenly noticed that her irises were so dark that in this light her eyes might be raven black. And perhaps he had underestimated her age. "I'd like to know why you're going around asking questions about Zola." "Alexander Zola," Salander said. "And above all, I'd like to know exactly what you know about him already." Alexander Zola, Svensson thought in shock. He had never known the first name. The girl lifted her coffee cup and took a sip without releasing him from her gaze. Her eyes had no warmth at all. He suddenly felt vaguely uneasy. Unlike Blomkvist and the other adults at the dinner party, and despite the fact that she was the birthday girl, Annika Giannini had drunk only light beer and refrained from any wine or aquavit with the meal. So at 10:30 she was stone cold sober. Since in some respects she took her big brother for a complete idiot who needed to be looked after, she generously offered to drive him home via Enskede. She had already planned to drive him to the bus stop on Varmdovigen, and it wouldn't take that much longer to go into the city. "Why don't you get your own car?" she complained anyway as Blomkvist fastened his seatbelt. "Because unlike you, I live within walking distance of my work and need a car about once a year. Besides, I wouldn't have been able to drive anyway after your husband started serving spirits from Skane. He's becoming Swedish. 10 years ago it would have been grappa." They spent the ride talking as brothers and sisters do. Apart from a persistent paternal aunt, 2 less persistent maternal aunts, 2 distant cousins, and 1 second cousin, Mikael and Annika had only each other for family. The 3-year age difference meant that they had not had much in common during their teens. But they had become closer as adults. Annika had studied law, and Blomkvist thought of her as a great deal more talented than he was. She sailed through university, spent a few years in the district courts, and then became the assistant to one of the better-known lawyers in Sweden. Then she started her own practice. She had specialized in family law, which gradually developed into work on equal rights. She became an advocate for abused women, wrote a book on the subject, and became a respected name. To top it off, she had become involved politically for the Social Democrats, which prompted Blomkvist to tease her about being an apparatchik. Blomkvist himself had decided early on that he could not combine party membership with journalistic credibility. He never willingly voted, and on the occasions when he felt absolutely obliged to vote he refused to talk about his choices, even with Berger. "How are you doing?" Annika said as they crossed Skurubrunn. "Oh, I'm doing fine." "So what's the problem?" "What problem?" "I know you, Mick. You've been preoccupied all evening." Blomkvist sat in silence for a moment. "It's a complicated story. I've got 2 problems right now. One is about a girl I met 2 years ago who helped me on the Wennerström affair and then just disappeared from my life with no explanation. I haven't seen hide nor hair of her in more than a year, except for last week." Blomkvist told her about the attack on Lundagatan. "Did you report it to the police?" "No." "Why not?" "This girl is manically private. She was the one who was attacked. She'll have to make the report." Which Blomkvist expected would not be high on Salander's list of priorities. "Bullheaded as usual," Annika said, patting Blomkvist on the cheek. "What's the second problem?" "We're working on a story at Millennium that's going to make headlines. I've been sitting all evening wondering whether I should consult you. As a lawyer, I mean." Annika glanced in surprise at her brother. "Consult me?" she exclaimed. "That'd be something new. The story's about trafficking and violence against women. You deal with violence against women and you're a lawyer. You probably don't work with cases of freedom of the press, but I would be really grateful if you could read through the manuscript before we send it to the printer." There are magazine articles and a book, so there's quite a bit to read. Annika was silent as she turned down the Hammarby Industrial Road and past Sickla Lock. She wound her way down side streets parallel to Nynäsvägen until she could turn up Enskede. You know, Mikael, I've been really mad at you only once in my whole life. Is that so? He said, surprised. It was when you were taken to court by Wennerström and sent to prison for libel. I was so furious with you that I thought I would explode. Why? I only made a fool of myself. You've made a fool of yourself many times before. But this time you needed a lawyer, and the only person you didn't turn to was me. Instead, you sat there taking shit in both the media and the courtroom. You didn't even defend yourself. I thought I was going to die. There were special circumstances. There wasn't a thing you could have done. All right, but I didn't understand that until later, when Millennium got back on its feet and mopped the floor with Wennerström. Until that happened, I was so damn disappointed in you. There was no way we could have won that trial. You're not getting the point, big brother. I understand that it was a hopeless case. I've read the judgment. The point was that you didn't come to me and ask for help. As in, hey, little sister, I need a lawyer. That's why I never turned up in court. Blomkvist thought it over. I'm sorry. I admit it, I should have done that. Yes, you should have. I wasn't functioning at all that year. I couldn't face talking to anybody. I just wanted to lie down and die. Which you didn't do, exactly. Forgive me. Annika Janini gave him a big smile. Beautiful. An apology 2 years later. Okay. I'll happily read through the text. Are you in a rush? Yes. We're going to press very soon. Turn left here. Annika parked across the street from the building on Björneborgsvägen where Svensson and Johansson lived. This'll just take a minute, Blomkvist said. He jogged across the street to punch in the door code. As soon as he was inside, he could tell that something was wrong. He heard excited voices echoing in the stairwell and ran up the 3 flights to the apartment. Not until he reached their floor did he realize that the commotion was all around their apartment. 5 neighbors were standing on the landing. The apartment door was ajar. What's going on? Blomkvist said, more out of curiosity than concern. They all fell silent and looked at him. 3 women, 2 men, all in their 70s it seemed. One of the women was wearing a nightgown. It sounded like shots, said a man in a brown dressing gown, who seemed to know what he was talking about. Shots? Just now. There was shooting in the apartment about a minute ago. The door was open. Blomkvist pushed forward and rang the doorbell as he walked into the apartment. Dag? Mia? He called. No answer. Suddenly he felt an icy shiver run down his neck. He recognized the smell. Cordite. Then he approached the living room door. The first thing he saw was Holy Mother of God Svensson slumped beside the dining room chairs in a pool of blood a yard across. Blomkvist hurried over. At the same time he pulled out his mobile and dialed 112 for emergency services. They answered right away. My name is Mikael Blomkvist. I need an ambulance and police. He gave the address. What is this regarding? A man. He seems to have been shot in the head and is unconscious. Blomkvist bent down and tried to find a pulse on Svensson's neck. Then he saw the enormous crater in the back of his head and realized that he must be standing in Svensson's brain matter. Slowly he withdrew his hand. No ambulance crew in the world would be able to save Dag Svensson now. Then he noticed shards from one of the coffee cups that Johansson had inherited from her grandmother and that she was so afraid would get broken. He straightened up quickly and looked all around. Mia, he yelled. The neighbor in the brown dressing gown had come into the hall behind him. Blomkvist turned at the living room door and held his hand up. Stop there, he said. Back out to the stairs. The neighbor at first looked as if he wanted to protest, but he obeyed the order. Blomkvist stood still for 15 seconds. Then he stepped around the pool of blood and proceeded warily past Svensson's body to the bedroom door. Johansson lay on her back on the floor at the foot of the bed. Nananono miatu, for God's sake. She had been shot in the face. The bullet had entered below her jaw by her left ear. The exit wound in her temple was as big as an orange and her right eye socket gaped empty. The flow of blood was, if possible, even greater than that from her partner. The force of the bullet had been such that the wall above the head of the bed, several yards away, was covered with blood splatter. Blomkvist became aware that he was clutching his mobile in a death grip with the line to the emergency center still open and that he had been holding his breath. He took air into his lungs and raised the telephone. "We need the police. 2 people have been shot. I think they're dead. Please hurry." He heard the voice from emergency services say something but did not catch the words. He felt as if there was something wrong with his hearing. It was utterly silent around him. He did not hear the sound of his own voice when he tried to say something. He backed out of the apartment. When he got out to the landing, he realized that his whole body was shaking and that his heart was pounding painfully. Without a word, he squeezed through the petrified crowd of neighbors and sat down on the stairs. From far away, he could hear the neighbors asking him questions. What happened? Are they hurt? Did something happen? The sound of their voices echoed as if coming through a tunnel. Blomkvist felt numb. He knew that he was in shock. He leaned his head down between his knees. Then he began to think. Good God, they've been murdered. They were shot just a few minutes ago. The killer could still be in the apartment. No, I would have seen him. He couldn't stop shaking. The sight of Johansson's shattered face could not be erased from his retina. Suddenly his hearing came back, as if someone had turned up a volume control. He got up quickly and looked at the neighbor in the dressing gown. "You," he said, "stay here and make sure nobody goes inside the apartment. The police and an ambulance are on their way. I'll go down and let them in." Blomkvist took the stairs 3 at a time. On the ground floor he glanced at the cellar stairs and stopped short. He took a step towards the cellar. Halfway down the stairs lay a revolver in plain sight. Blomkvist thought it looked like a Colt .45 Magnum, the kind of weapon used to murder Olof Palme. He suppressed the impulse to pick up the weapon. Instead, he went and opened the front door and stood in the night air. It was not until he heard the brief honk of a car horn that he remembered his sister was waiting for him. He walked across the street. Annika opened her mouth to say something sarcastic about her brother's tardiness. Then she saw the expression on his face. "Did you see anyone while you were waiting?" Blomkvist asked. His voice sounded hoarse and unnatural. "No. Who would that be? What happened?" Blomkvist was silent for a few seconds while he looked left and right. Everything was quiet on the street. He reached into his jacket pocket and found a crumpled pack with 1 cigarette left. As he lit it, he could hear sirens approaching in the distance. He looked at his watch. It was 11 to 17 p.m. "Annika, this is going to be a long night," he said without looking at her as the police car turned up the street. The first to arrive were officers Magnusson and Olsen. They had been on Nynäsvägen responding to what turned out to be a false alarm. Magnusson and Olsen were followed by a staff car with the field superintendent, Oswald Martinsson, who had been at Skanstull when the central switchboard had sent out a call for all cars in the area. They arrived at almost the same time from different directions and saw a man in jeans and a dark jacket standing in the middle of the street raising his hand for them to stop. At the same time, a woman got out of a car parked a few yards away. All 3 policemen froze. The central switchboard had reported that 2 people had been shot, and the man was holding something in his left hand. It took a couple of seconds to be sure that it was a mobile telephone. They got out of their cars at the same time and adjusted their belts. Martinsson assumed command. "Are you the one who called about a shooting?" The man nodded. He seemed badly shaken. He was smoking a cigarette and his hand was trembling when he put it in his mouth. "What's your name?" "Mikael Blomkvist. 2 people were just shot in this building a very short time ago." Their names are Dag Svensson and Mia Johansson. 3 floors up. Their neighbors are standing outside the door. Good Lord, the woman said. And who are you? Martinson asked Annika. Annika Janini. I'm his sister, she said, pointing at Blomkvist. Do you live here? No, Blomkvist said. I was going to visit the couple who were shot. My sister gave me a ride from a dinner party. You say that 2 people were shot. Did you see what happened? No. I found them. Let's go up and have a look, Martinson said. Wait, Blomkvist said. According to the neighbors, the shots were fired only a minute or so before I arrived. I dialed 112 within a minute of getting here. Since then, less than 5 minutes have passed. That means the person who killed them must still be in the area. Do you have a description? We haven't seen anyone, but it's possible that some of the neighbors saw something. Martinson motioned to Magnusson, who raised his radio and talked into it in a low voice. He turned to Blomkvist. Can you show us the way? He said. When they got inside the front door, Blomkvist stopped and pointed to the cellar stairs. Martinson bent down and looked at the weapon. He went all the way down the stairs and tried the cellar door. It was locked. Olsen, stay here and keep an eye on this, Martinson said. Outside the apartment, the crowd of neighbors had thinned out. 2 had gone back to their own apartments, but the man in the dressing gown was still at his post. He seemed relieved when he saw the uniformed officers. I didn't let anyone in, he said. That's good, Blomkvist and Martinson said together. There seemed to be bloody tracks on the stairs, Officer Magnusson said. Everyone looked at the footprints. Blomkvist looked at his Italian loafers. Those are probably from my shoes, he said. I was inside the apartment. There's quite a bit of blood. Martinson gave Blomkvist a searching look. He used a pen to push open the apartment door and found more bloody footprints in the hall. To the right, Dag Svensson's in the living room and Mia Johansson's in the bedroom. Martinson did a quick inspection of the apartment and came out after only a few seconds. He radioed to ask for backup from the criminal duty officer. As he finished talking, the ambulance crew arrived. Martinson stopped them as they were going in. 2 victims. As far as I can see, they're beyond help. Can one of you look in without messing up the crime scene? It did not take long to confirm. A paramedic decided that the bodies would not be taken to hospital for resuscitation. They were beyond help. Blomkvist suddenly felt sick to his stomach and turned to Martinson. I'm going outside. I need some air. Unfortunately, I can't let you go just yet. I'll just sit on the porch outside the door. May I see your ID, please? Blomkvist took out his wallet and put it in Martinson's hand. Then he turned without a word and went outside, where Annika was still waiting with Officer Olsen. She sat down next to him. Mick, what happened? 2 people I liked a lot have been murdered. Dag Svensson and Mia Johansson. It was his manuscript I wanted you to read. Annika realized that this was no time to ply him with questions. Instead, she put her arm around her brother's shoulders and hugged him. More police cars arrived. A handful of curious nighttime onlookers had stopped on the pavement across the street. Blomkvist watched them while the police started to set up a cordon. A murder investigation was beginning. It was past 3 o'clock a.m. by the time Blomkvist and his sister were allowed to leave the police station. They had spent an hour in Annika's car outside the apartment building in Enskede, waiting for a duty prosecutor to arrive to initiate the pre-investigative stage. Then, since Blomkvist was a good friend of the 2 victims and since he was the one who had found them, they were asked to follow along to Kingsholmen to assist the investigation. There they'd had to wait a long time before they were interviewed by an Inspector Nyberg at the station. She had light blonde hair and looked like a teenager. I'm getting old, Blomkvist thought. By 2:30 he had drunk so many cups of police canteen coffee that he was sober and feeling unwell. He had to interrupt the interview and run to the toilet, where he was violently sick. He still had the image of Johansson's face swimming in his head. He drank 3 cups of water and rinsed his face over and over before returning to the interview. He tried to pull himself together to answer all of Inspector Nyberg's questions. Did Dag Svensson or Mia Johansson have enemies? No, not that I know of. Had they received any threats? Not that I know of. How would you describe their relationship? They gave every appearance of loving each other. Dag told me that they were thinking of having a baby after Mia got her doctorate. Did they use drugs? I don't know for sure, but I don't think so, and if they did it would be nothing more than a joint at a party when they had something to celebrate. Why were you visiting them so late at night? Blomkvist explained that they were doing last-minute work on a book, without identifying the subject. Wasn't it unusual to call on people so late at night? That was the first time it had ever happened. How did you know them? Through work. The questions were relentless as they tried to establish the time frame. The shots had been heard all over the building. They had been fired less than 5 seconds apart. The 70-year-old man in the dressing gown, a retired major from the coastal artillery, as it turned out, was their nearest neighbor. He was watching TV. After the second shot, he went out to the stairwell. He had a hip problem and so getting up from the sofa was a slow process. He estimated that it had taken him 30 seconds to reach the landing. Neither he nor any other neighbor had seen anybody on the stairs. According to the neighbors, Blomkvist had arrived at the apartment less than 2 minutes after the second shot was fired. Calculating that he and Annika had had a view of the street for half a minute while she found the right building, parked, and exchanged a few words before he crossed the street and went up the stairs, Blomkvist figured there was a window of 30 to 40 seconds. During which time the killer had left the apartment, gone down 3 flights of stairs, dropping the weapon on the way, left the building, and disappeared before Annika turned into the street. They had just missed him. For a dizzying moment Blomkvist realized that Inspector Nyberg was toying with the possibility that he himself could have been the killer, that he had only run down 1 flight and pretended to arrive on the scene after the neighbors had gathered. But he had an alibi in the form of his sister. His whole evening, including the telephone conversation with Svensson, could be vouched for by a dozen members of the Giannini family. Eventually Annika put her foot down. Blomkvist had given all reasonable and conceivable help. He was visibly tired and he was not feeling well. She told the inspector that she was not only Blomkvist's sister but also his lawyer. It was time to bring all this to a close and let him go home. When they got out to the street they stood for a time next to Annika's car. "Go home and get some sleep," she said. Blomkvist shook his head. "I have to go to Erika's," he said. "She knew them too. I can't just call and tell her, and I don't want her to wake up and hear it on the news." Annika hesitated, but she knew that her brother was right. "So, off to Saltsjöbaden," she said. "Can you take me? What are little sisters for? If you give me a lift out to Nacka I can take a taxi from there or wait for a bus." "Nonsense. Jump in and I'll drive you." Operator Olof Palme was the Prime Minister of Sweden from 1969 to 1976 and 1982 to 1986. He was assassinated in 1986, shot twice in a street ambush in central Stockholm. His murder remains unsolved.
And that marks the end of the current chapter. Thank you for listening to The Book Reader. Stay tuned for the next episode tomorrow. Please subscribe for updates.